Hi, welcome back, and I have finally gotten around to putting a video together on how I edit my gig photography. So this is kind of an opening video. It actually turned out far longer than I expected it to be, so please do settle down or watch it in installments. This is covering the core, the basics that I do, that pretty much every shot gets. It doesn't really go into any of the problem editing. Both of the shots here I don't think are much more than 1250 ISO, so nothing in terms of the higher noise stuff or the more challenging shots, but it hopefully will give you an idea of my approach to editing gig photography and a couple of the techniques that I use that I think do help get the look I want from the images. We're going to look at one colour and one black and white image as part of this, and without any further ado, let's sit down at the desk and see what's what. Okay, so let's start with our colour image, and what you can see on screen at the moment is the shot as taken. So both of these shots were taken with my Olympus EM1 Mark II. Both of them were actually taken with my 45mm f1.8, and you can see all the relevant data up the top there. Now we're going to be looking at turning this shot into this shot. Now if I do a quick A/B of these, you can see that the before image and the after image, hopefully you agree there's quite a significant improvement between the two shots there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through the colour image, then I'm going to talk you through the black and white image, and these are kind of like the core steps that I take when I'm editing an image shot at a gig. So without any further ado, let's get back to our single image and go into the develop module. Now, as you can tell, I am here using Lightroom Classic. It's my preferred editing tool, so that's what I'm going to be going through. There are other editing packages available, obviously, and most of what I go through here you can adapt relatively easy to other editing suites. So looking at this shot first of all, and a couple of things stand out. The first one is that from a contrast point of view it is fairly flat. There is a distinct red cast over the entire image. Now this is from the stage lights, and in some cases you want to keep that, in other cases you don't want to keep that, and it very much depends on the aesthetic that you're going for. And in this one I basically want a bit of a cleaner look on this. I want a more natural look to the skin tones, and I will definitely want to darken up the background to isolate the subject, because it is a little bit flat, a little bit one-dimensional at the present moment. So let's get started. Now first thing I always start with is the actual crop. So I'm going to go into the crop here. Now one thing you will notice, and this is a peculiarity of how I shoot on the Olympus, is the actual as shot is quite different to what you can see, and I always do this. I shoot with a different ratio than the one that it can capture on. So my standard capture aspect ratio is a 2:3, but you can capture on a 4:3 on the Olympus. So I don't know why I do it, I just always do it. So I'm just popping this to the original so we can see everything that the sensor captured here. And the main thing that I want to do here is I want to bring the subject's head down slightly to put it better in frame, and I've cut off the arm, forearm here and the wrist, and it just looks very disjointed. So I'm going to start off with just by cropping up to here, move along a little bit there. Now, I'm not a stickler for the rule of thirds, but that for me is a much better composition. So if I just crop down to that, what you'll see straight away is I've got rid of the hand and the arm that was all cut off. The fact that you can still see the bass guitar here is absolutely fine. That's exactly what I want, and it's removed a lot of distraction from the background of the shot as well already. So we're in a much better place from a composition point of view. Now as I shoot mirrorless, I must confess I've got no idea how much the lens correction and the remove chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections do, but I always select them. Can't hurt, can it? So let's pop those on. I've never actually noticed a blind bit of difference with mirrorless cameras when I've done that, but there we go. Now you will notice that I have reordered my tabs here. This is my preferred method, and I've also switched on the tool that basically just keeps one open at a time, and you can do all of this just by right clicking. Select solo mode is what ensures that only one panel is ever open at a time, so that can be quite useful. And if you go into customize, you can turn these on and off, and you can drag them up and down to your heart's content. And this is my fairly typical work order. The stuff I don't use a great deal, transform, lens blur, effects and calibration, I keep down the bottom. The rest is close to my standard workflow in here. Right, so let's get started with our basic tab, and the first thing I want to do is try and sort out this red color cast. Now it's always worth giving the white balance auto a shot, and that's actually not bad. It's not bad. I think it could do with a little bit more work. It's got the skin tones looking much more natural, but it has put a bit of an overall blue cast on there, and I want to cut out some of that blue. So let's just up that. That's a little bit better. And I want to try and get there's still a little bit of readiness in here. So I'm actually going to pull the tint down quite a bit. Let's get that. Let's see. So I'm going to be quite aggressive with the tint here. That's actually much better. Okay, so we've got a much better look there. We can see straight away the skin tone's looking far more natural. We've got rid of pretty much all of that color cast. We are picking up a green color cast here from a different stage light, but that's not really an issue at all because it's not affecting the image itself. So yeah, I'm pretty happy, and if we just switch that on and off, that's already made a huge difference. Right, so we can now actually start playing around with our tone settings. So if I just bring these up. Now, one trick that you might use a lot is the shift and double click on the exposure to set an auto exposure. Now that can work in nicely balanced outdoor shots and things like that. It rarely works well with gigs because you tend to have a very dark background, and what it tends to do is just go, no, this is massively underexposed, we need to pull a lot more light in here, and that is far too much. Now, I don't disagree that we could probably push the exposure up a little bit here to work with it, but nowhere near the degree that was going on there. So I'm just gonna push it up there. There, that looks about right to me, so just under half a stop. Keep in mind that we are going to be doing a lot of local edits here, so I'm just looking for an overall look to the exposure, and I wanted to pull out a bit more in the subject's hair and in this guitar headstock just here on the mic, so I wanted to bring a bit more in there. It has, as you can see here, pulled up a lot more rubbish in the background, but we're going to fix that in a moment, because what we're going to start doing now is playing around with our highlights, shadows, whites and blacks. One thing you will notice, and I very rarely do, I very rarely use the contrast slider. I'm not a huge fan of it. I tend to use the tone curves, and I tend to use, not normally on an overall level, the presence tool, so texture, clarity and dehaze, all of which play around with contrast. So I always start from the bottom with blacks, and I'm a Windows user, so I hold down the Alt key and start by pushing these blacks down. So this will show you where your blacks are clipping, and I'm going to push it towards the darkness here, and it starts showing me now. I'm not going to be particularly subtle here. I am going to push these blacks down, yeah, to probably about there. Let's have a look. There, yeah, there we go. So this has already started pulling a lot of the blacks around the edges down and removing the background distractions quite a bit. And I don't mind about the clipping on that. I want some really good subject isolation. I don't want to completely destroy the background, but I do want some subject isolation around here. Now that's effectively set my black point, and we've got some black clipping going on there. But as I say, I'm cool with that. What I want to look at now is our whites. And now this is picking up the specular highlights just here. So you almost always have to play a bit of a balancing game when it comes to whites and highlights on gig photography, because what you're trying to do is balance removing any really bright highlights that have been reflected off of lights here without completely destroying the white point on your image. Sometimes you can do it, sometimes you have to take a bit more of a nuanced view and just think that's close enough. And I think that probably is, that probably is. We aren't getting rid of it completely. There are a few tricks we can do, which I'm not going to do on this image, but I will show you on the black and white one, that will allow me to play around with this. And I'm probably not going to. Let's just have a quick look. The shadows. No, I'm going to leave the shadows where they are. I don't really see any benefit in playing around with those. And now let's do a quick before and after on this. So the / key on my keyboard, that's what it is on Windows. And yeah, we're definitely seeing some quite big improvements there. Right, by the way, one keyboard shortcut if you want to see where you are clipping without having to hit these little clipping buttons or hover over them, you can just press J on your keyboard and that will toggle your clipping masks on and off. So a handy one there. Right, coming down to presence, as I said, not playing around with presence at all. I'm going to use it, but I'm going to use it on a selective area. So I'm going to use that with some masks in a little while. But I do want to talk a little bit about vibrance and saturation. For all of my images, as a baseline, will add 10 to the vibrance and take 10 away from the saturation. What I find is that saturation, because it saturates and brings up every single colour on the image, it can give quite an artificial look. Whereas vibrance will just bring forward those colours which don't have a certain level of saturation, so it's a lot more subtle. Now, this is a personal thing, but it is what I tend to go for. So that is my base point. And I will generally only play around with it if I see a real need to do so, and I very rarely do in my gig photography. So that's pretty much where that's going to stay for there, because as I say, I don't play around with that a great deal at all. Now, when it comes to tone curves, I tend to use tone curves quite lightly, and this again is just a personal choice, and to get them consistent as a base point, because what I've found myself with the tone curves is I struggle to get a consistent tone curve set every single time, which can be a bit of a problem if you're editing a batch of images. So what I've actually done is I've got two user presets set up, a very slight contrast tweak, and if I click on that one you'll be able to see where that is on the map, and I'll just hover over each of the points so you can see how they are set up. Okay, so you see I've set a midpoint there, and we've got a black and a white point set on there, and then we've just got a slight drop here and a slight up here, so it's the very slightest of S-curves on there. And once you've set up a slight one and you want to create it, you just come over to presets, click on plus, and that will allow you to create your own preset based off that. But as I say, I tend to keep two presets, a very slight contrast tweak and a slight contrast tweak. And for this one, I actually think we're going to go for the slight contrast tweak there. So you can see that's got a little bit more of a drop in the darker mids there, so in the shadows, and a little bit up on the highlights. So that's my preference, and I tend to like working like this. Now, that's our tone curve done. The colour mixer, I'm not going to play around with the colour mixer on this particular video. It is a very powerful tool and it can be extremely useful, but it can also completely ruin your image. So I'm not going to play around with the color mixer here. We're going to come back and look at how this can be used both in mixer and my preference point color on a separate video. This is just around the core edits we're looking here. Right, so down to color grading. Now, I'm a big fan of color grading, but not for actual color grading, weirdly enough. You see, because if I just pop back up to basics and our tone a second, we've got the ability to play around with our highlights, our shadows, our whites and blacks, but there's absolutely nothing in there that allows you to adjust your mid-tone. What you have to do, because this is a little bit of a secret here, or a little bit of a trick, is come into color grading, select the mid-tones, and then using the luminance slider, you don't play around with the color at all. You do not play around with the hue or saturation. You leave that at 0 and 0. You don't bother with the blending or the balance. You use the luminance, and the luminance here now becomes a mid-tone slider, which is really handy. And this can be extremely powerful because it allows me to just push those mids up a little bit. Now, it is also quite a fine tool, so you'll find that you can go to some quite extreme values and it's not massively overworking the image. Now, I am going to push this up to around about, let's say, 25. Now, I do know that is pushing quite a few highlights in the skin tone here, but we're going to come back and fix that pretty much straight away. But that's just helped there, and if I just do a before and after on that, it's very subtle, but it's helping pull up some of the colours around here and around the skin tones on the arm and in the hair here. It is, as I say, being a little bit overblown on some of the skin, but it is helping the eyes as well. But overall, that's got my basic edits done there. What I'm going to move on to now is my actual masking. So I'm going to head into the masking tab and let the people detection do its job. I am a big fan of the people detection tool within here. You might need at times to play around with it and fine tune it a little bit, but it does save you an awful lot of time. So I'm just going to go in and select person 1 here, and I am then going to select, we want facial skin, I want body skin, and you'll see as I hover over these, it shows me what's being selected here. And the body skin one here, it is picking up on the guitars, the bass guitars headstock and a few bits here. We'll sort that out in a minute. That's not a problem. Eyebrows can't be seen, and I very rarely bother adjusting them anyway. Whites of the eyes and iris and pupil, definitely want those. Lips, teeth, don't need those, but hair, actually clothes we don't need. You can't hardly see any of the clothes there with the hair and the arm in. So I've got those masks. I hit create mask and we've now got them, and we can make a start. Now, here's my go-to with adjusting skin in gig photography. What you tend to have a lot of is really dominant highlights and really dominant shadow areas, and I find that the exposure tool is too crude to fix these in the way I want to. So I actually heavily use the highlights and the shadow tools here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to pull the highlights down, and there we go. Look at that. That's made an absolutely colossal difference straight away. If we just look at what that's done, we've still got some highlight detail in there. You know, we are not losing the contours on the skin here. We're removing that really nasty highlight, and you don't want to completely remove all of the highlights because you lose contouring with that. You just want to tame this and control this, and what you basically do is you use a combination of the highlights and the shadow sliders to contour the features as you need them to be. So with the shadows, sometimes you need to pull shadows out, sometimes you need to add shadows in a little bit, and that's what I'm going to do here, just a little bit. There we go, that's it. So that's just really put some contour and some definition around in here. Looks very natural. Now, one thing I will occasionally do is come down to effects and use the clarity slider just to take a bit of clarity out of the image there. So not too much, round about there will do. It doesn't remove texture from the skin, but it can just even up the skin a little bit and be a little bit more flattering. It's a personal choice as to whether you use it, but I'm a big fan of it in the right circumstances. But there we go, that has made a huge difference to the skin there, and that's what I mean about using highlights and shadows as your tool to effectively contour the person's features whilst taming the highlights. But keep in mind, don't try removing all of the highlights. It will look really weird and really unnatural. Okay, so we can now move on to the body skin side of things, and with this one, as I say, we've got the neck and we've got the arm done there. Now you notice that it's gone over a little bit, and one of the advantages with using the highlights and shadow sliders is you don't really need to worry about that too much. It's not like when you're using exposure where it's going to give you a really weird halo, so it's actually a more controllable tool. But I am just going to hit subtract here. I'm going to use a brush, and I'm just going to make it a really hard brush by popping the flow and density up to 100, and I'm just going to pull that out of the guitar headstock and the areas around it shouldn't be. So there we go. So that's much better. I'm not going to worry too much about adding that little bit back in there for the sake of this video. Normally I would, but in this case I'm not. I'm instead going to go back to the actual mask here, and I'm once again, do I need to pull highlights down here? No, not really. Let's just, no, you see that's removing our contour, so I'm just going to double click to reset that, and what I'm actually going to do here is reduce the shadows slightly. Oh sorry, pull more shadows in slightly so we got that better contour around there. So yeah, I'm happy with those. Let's just have a look. Yep, that's good. Right, now eyes, onto the whites of the eyes, and I have a nice preset formula I tend to use for eyes. So when I'm dealing with the whites of the eyes, I will pop the exposure up by 0.1. I will add 5 into the highlights, and for the whites of the eyes, come down to saturation, and this is one way you do need to just do it on a case-by-case basis, but I'm just dropping the saturation ever so slightly just to make the whites more white. What I then do is go up to the iris and pupil, exposure, I up by 0.15, again 5 points on the highlights, but this time go down to clarity and just pull clarity up very slightly. So there we go, around about there, just to give us a bit more clarity in there, and just make those eyes stand out and become a focal point for us. Right, final one, the hair. What I'm just going to do here, and I very often do with hair, might just pull the shadows up a little bit, so we're pulling a bit more detail out of the shadows, so not much. Don't want to overdo it, because if you overdo it, it ends up looking very silly. So just want to add about a 2 or a 3 on there. Just pulls a little bit more detail out of the hair, and then go down, and I'm going to add a tiny amount, just again very tiny amount, around about 3 or 4. 3 will do there. A bit of texture in there. Now, if we were editing the clothing, I'd do a similar thing with the clothing, but rather than using texture there, I'll add a small amount of both clarity and dehaze. That tends to work better with clothing than texture does. So I use texture for hair, either head hair or facial hair, and I use a small amount of clarity and dehaze for actual clothing textures. Now, the final thing I want to do here in terms of our masks is I'm going to add in a radial gradient. So I'm going to go and click on create new mask and select radial gradient. Now, before I apply the radial gradient, I'm just going to zoom out to 6.3%, so we've got plenty of room to play around with our gradient. And I'm going to set a radial gradient around about there. Just going to twist it a little bit and pull it back, because the back area here is already in shadow, so I don't need to worry too much about that. And I want the mic to be in there. I tend to find that you want this bias towards the front of the person, the direction the person's facing in. So I've got the shape of my radial gradient, then go to the center of it, right click, and select invert. So this is basically going to give us a kind of vignette mask, but much more controlled. Now you can either go back to fit or just hit Z on your keyboard to fit it back onto the screen, and we then go up to our exposure and we start pulling our exposure down to taste. Now I don't want to completely remove the background because again it looks a bit fake, so I'm actually only going to need about a stop and a half or so here, maybe a little bit more. Let's take that down. Okay, there we go. Now one of the things that we've got here is you'll notice that it's losing the mic leads and the mic stand just here. So while I'm happy with the overall look of that vignette, what I am just going to do is go in and hit subtract, select brush, and I'm going to soften this brush down to mid 60s or so, and then just pop it open a little bit and just add in some very fine brush strokes here. It's a nice soft brush, so Control Z to put that back. So we've added in a little bit more here, and you can always use your custom slider here to increase or decrease that. Remember, because this is remove, it works the opposite way round. So don't quite want that. So round about there we go. So that's just now added the rest of that mic lead and a little bit of the stand. So that actually forms a leading line into the picture. So what you've got there is you've got a leading line up to our subject's face here, and the guitar's also doing that, and they're nicely positioned with a lot of negative space over here. And if I go back to our main image in our main develop area here, you can see what we've got. So final thing I'm going to do is go into detail and just sharpen this. So its automatic pick here is just nothing, so I'm just going to click on that to zoom out and then click to zoom into the eyes. When it comes to sharpening, I find that eyes, guitar strings and microphones, I just go into the microphone. Microphones are absolutely great targets for sharpening, so that's what I tend to focus on, but the eye here is a good one. Now, I always hold down the Alt key and set the masking, and when I'm setting the masking, look at the main image, because what we're trying to do here is only sharpen areas that we care about, because if we try and sharpen everything, we add unnecessary noise. So I'm just going to pull this down until really it's only our subject and only the areas of our subject that we care about are going to be sharpened. So that looks good to me. So we've got what there, around about 88. Then go up to sharpening, hold the hold the Alt key down again, and then play around with our sharpening amount. And I tend to look at the smaller image when I'm doing this, and that's about right. That's good as far as I'm concerned. There we go. So that's our sharpening done. Be very careful not to over sharpen images. You don't want to do that. It looks horrendous. I'm not adding in any noise reduction at all. This was shot at 1250 ASA, and the exposure was pretty much decent on it, so we've got a reasonable clean image there. Yes, there is a bit of noise. You can see it in some of the shadow areas in the background here. I personally have no issue with that at all. For me, it adds texture. There is nothing wrong with that image from a sharpness, resolution or detail scale. And I can absolutely guarantee you that this image, because I have done, will quite happily print up to an A2 size. So there we go. That is our final edited image. And if we compare it to where we started off with, I'm sure you would agree that that's a significant improvement we've got there. So that's before and after. Okay, next step is to move on to our black and white image. Okay, so this is our starting image for our black and white, and this is the kind of shot that I like taking a lot. I like detailed pictures of and close-ups of people playing their instruments and performing. It's kind of, if I've got one, it's as close to a signature style for my gig photography as I have. And this is a good friend of mine, Richard, playing guitar here, and I really like this image, but I knew when I first saw it in the edit suite that I wanted it in black and white, and I wanted it to be contrasty. Now, issues we have with it are we've got a very heavy blue tint on here from the stage lights, and although we're turning it into black and white, we do want to address that, and I'll explain why shortly. This hand here is amazingly distracting because the stage lights are just pulling up huge highlights off of it, and we've got this light in the background that's quite distracting. So we need to fix all of those. When fixed, it will look like this. So let's get to work. Right, so over to crop and straighten, and all I'm going to do with this one is set it to the original in there. So that's all I'm doing with that. I am perfectly happy with everything else in that. That's all I'm doing. I don't need to crop it any further. Sometimes you don't. That just, it works from a compositional point of view. We've got our axis line for the guitar as a leading line cutting through our upper third here. The hand is occupying the right hand third as well. Our other hand is on the lower third line just here and very close to the left hand third as well. We've got a nice area of what will become fairly negative space over here, nicely balanced. So I'm perfectly happy with how all of that is. Right, so let's go back to our main tab, up to lens corrections, and I'm going to pop both of those in again. Now, I'm not going to go through in as much detail as everything I did in the first image. What I'm going to do instead is talk you through the main key changes that we're going to do here. So I'm going to go into our basic tab first of all, and before we hit the black and white button to convert it into black and white, what we're going to do is have a look at auto and see if we can change the white balance, and I'll explain why in a moment, but that's horrendous. That's just absolutely horrible. So I'm going to go back to our shot and do some of this manually. So see what I can get out of here. Okay, this is where we can be quite sneaky. I'm actually going to bias this as much towards blue as I possibly can for reasons that will become self-evident. And that's when we get down to using our, we can't see it at the moment, our black and white sliders in a moment, but that is very heavily blue, but trust me, this will work, I promise you. So we've dropped our temperature and our tint down there just to bias towards blue here. I'm going to hit the black and white button and bingo, it already looks a lot better. Some people might be quite happy with where we are there, but we do need to do a little bit more work on this to really nail it. So first thing we'll do is we will go over to our exposure. Now again, if I shift and double click, actually that's not too bad this time. I don't really have any major issues with that. It's worked actually quite well. I'm just going to drop it very slightly. Sometimes you can't manage the sliders and you just have to go in and overtype it. That's what I did just there. So around about there, I'm happy with. I'm not too worried about what we've got here because I know we've got plenty we can pull out here in terms of detail. We're going to be okay there. But what I want to do now is set my black and white points. So black, I'm just going to pull down because it's not going to overly affect what we've got with the image, and sometimes this is a case of trying to see in the clipping mask what you want to keep and what you don't want to keep, and you'll see here that the areas that the blacks have pulled down are predominantly areas that I really don't care about being in the detail, and that works. It's a fairly hefty amount of black clipping, but it works from that point of view. We are going to have to do something about this over here eventually, but we'll come back to that. Now, it's a similar story with our shadows, but we'll come on to those in a minute. Let's have a look at our white point, and we don't actually have any white clipping, so let's push this up until we get some whites in there. So we've got some whites in there, but because we want this quite contrasty, I think we're going to have to play around a little bit here eventually anyway. So yeah, I want to pull the whites up a little bit more there, and then, and this again, this seems a bit counterintuitive, but I'm pulling the whites up because this isn't a white, it's a highlight. And what I want to do instead is actually get a proper white point in there, and that's coming off of the white on here, and that is white just there. I've completely forgotten what that part of the guitar is called. It'll come to me in a second. It's not the bridge, that's down there. The nut there is white, so that's actually quite right. And I'm then just going to tame my highlights down here. But let's have a look. Now you see that's too high, so I'm going to around about there, because we can pull this stuff out here. We're getting some nice detail in the guitar's neck here. We've still got some detail in the body of the guitar, and to a degree in the clothing. A little bit much, I want to pull that back, and this I can tidy up later on. Overall balance though, I'm quite happy with that so far, but we haven't looked at the shadows, and we can definitely, because I want a high contrast image here, we can definitely, and again, you'll see I'm being really aggressive with the shadows here, but I don't have an issue with that, because if I turn off the clipping, and you know, I'm taking this almost to 90 there, but that works. That works. That's working from the point of view of our high contrast image. The main areas we need to work on here are isolating the hand and the guitar neck here, controlling the highlights in this area here, and getting rid of this distracting background noise. But we're on the right path here. Now, in terms of tone curves, again, as I say, I preset mine, always do. And one of the nice things about presetting them as well is if you roll over them, you can see what the different effects of them are. So I'm going to go for the slightly more aggressive one, although it is only slightly more aggressive, but there we go, that's got that one done. Right, now, with our tone curve in, our next point down is black and white. Now, this is where you can use the original colours on the image to either lighten or darken the monochrome grayscale that relates to them. And this is why we left a lot of blue in. Now, how I always use this is if you go to this little circle and click on it and then come over to your image, it will actually show you as you move over. So you can see there, lots of blue, lots of purple all around here, and other colours, anything you want to play around with. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to just up those ever so slightly, just have a play around with them so that we can get what we want in. Now that's got the blue and the purple areas. Now there will still be some areas here that haven't been affected by the light, and they're a bit tricky to pull up. So what I'm actually going to do is going to go to my orange and my yellow and just see if they make any difference. Our yellow doesn't really, so, and does our orange? No, so we're not missing anything, so that's absolutely fine. And that was part of the reason of basically putting that much blue on there and biasing it towards blue, because we can now use our aqua, our blue, and our purple as overall tone controls for our image. that's good. I like that. That's got us where we need to be there. Right, and then for our mids, we go down to color grading, make sure we've got mid-tones selected, come down to our luminance slider, and we can play around with our mids here, and just want to pull a little bit more out here. So there we go. Now, I am aware as I'm doing this that it looks like I'm just losing information in here and ruining this. I'm not. I can pull that back, and we will do in a moment. This is more about the overall balance, and in particular this area on the guitar here, the neck and the strings that we can see. So we've got all of our main stuff done. Let's move over away from our edit tool and into our masks. Now, unsurprisingly, no people are found in here. It's not going to recognize this. So what we now need to do is select the areas that we are interested in. So the first one I want to do is select this hand. Now, I could use a brush, but I'm going to give the object tool a go here and just use this first of all to map out the area I'm interested in. See how well it picks it up. That's actually pretty damn good. What I am just going to have to do is click on Add Objects, come down and select the thumb there. Let's pick the thumb up. Excellent. Quite happy with that. That's gone really well. Now, I am going to need to drop those highlights, and I'm going to need to drop those quite aggressively. Yeah, about there is looking good, and I want to pull the shadows up. So I'm going to need to pull the shadows up quite a bit here. And as I say, this is a balance. You have to play around with these together until you get to the point that you are happy with on those, and that, huge difference. Absolutely massive. In fact, I'm just going to dial those back a little bit, and I very rarely do this, but I am just going to pop a little bit of additional exposure in there. Really, really tiny amount. This might not even show on YouTube, but that, there we go. We've got the detail of the hand. We can see what the hand's doing. We can see the movement of the skin and everything around there. You know, we've got the detail that we need in there, and we've pulled that back. That's exactly what I wanted. So that one I'm really happy with. But it's made this one even more obvious in terms of how nasty it is. So let's add in another object mask and see if we can't mask this one out. So there we go. That's good enough. That's absolutely fine, because all I want to do here is just pull down the highlights on that. Now, I don't want to go too far because it can look a bit weird, and that might be a bit much. So there we go. Because we are going to do something to tidy this up in a little bit and draw even more attention away from there. But that's okay. That's turned off that horribleness on there. Right. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to add in and do our radial gradient, because that will help tidy up this. It will help tidy up this, and we'll know after that how much more work we need to do. So again, I've selected radial gradient, I've come down, and this I want to do really tightly. I want to focus all our attention just on this area here. So again, right click and invert, zoom to come back into fit screen, and I am going to drop this background down, and I'm going to be really aggressive with this. I'm going to go down to about 2.5 stops on this. Now we could go all the way down and that will completely isolate it, but it just looks weird. It's out of context. I want something still in the background just to give it a sense of place. So around about there is good, and that has tamed this and this. If I had time, which I don't on the video, I would have tidied up that mask to get rid of this weird halo effect here. And on the other image I showed you originally, that is what I have done. But for the sake of brevity on this video, that's good enough. You can see what I've done there. I've taken that down. I am actually going to just take those down a little bit more. That's much better. That's worked with the vignette as well. Okay, so only a couple of things I want to carry on doing with the masking. The first one is this highlight here. It's really distracting and we need to tame it. Now, your object selection won't work on this because of the way it's set up. What you will need to do is go in and select a brush for these. Make sure it's fairly soft and just go around the center just like that. I need a little bit more around the edges. Ooh. That's it, and then pull the highlights down on that. Now we don't want to pull them down too much because it looks really weird. Again, we want to just pull it down enough that it's taming it, and that's absolutely fine. It is taming it enough for it not to be as distracting as it was. Now again, on the full one I showed you originally, I put a lot more care into actually selecting that. I'm just doing it for brevity on the video, and I was able to pull it down a little bit more than that, but I don't want to pull it down any more than it is here. And then the final one, I just want to draw a little bit more attention to the guitar neck here and the reflection of the hand that we've got on the bottom of the neck. So again, I'm just going to go in with a very soft brush, just pop it up to about that size and just highlight those areas and pop the exposure up ever so slightly. That's too much. There we go. Now again, you might not see that change on YouTube, but that is just pulling this up ever so slightly, and it's quite effective. Again, I'd probably tidy that up a bit more in reality. Let's just do that very quickly actually. I would just choose the brush again and just tame off the edges there and around there. There we go. That's a little bit better. I'd spend more time fine-tuning it in reality than I'm doing on this, and I would suggest you do as well, but that's just tidied that up. Right, let's go back and add in sharpening, so you'll get to see here just how good guitar strings are from a sharpening point of view. There we go, we've got a nice set of guitar strings just in there, we can see. So remember, hold down the Alt key for the masking and look at the main image and pull it to only sharpen what you want to sharpen when the mask's showing, and then adjust your amount looking at the smaller image to make sure you're getting the right level of sharpening in, not too much. There we go. That is it. I am extremely happy with that one, considering I had to do a very quick edit on that in comparison to what I'd normally do. We've got a good amount of detail showing in the image there. We've got a lot of contrast, and it really focuses on what the left hand is doing there and how it's fretting the guitar. We can see the tension. It's highlighted the tension in the fingers just here as it's fretting on the guitar. We can still see what the strumming hand's doing, but it's a nice high contrast isolated image. And if we look at the before and the after, again, that's exactly what I was aiming for. There we go. Okay, so that's our black and white example done as well. Okay, thank you for watching. Hopefully you found the video useful. As I did say, it's quite a long one, but I think it was worthwhile. I certainly hope you agree, and if you do, please do hit the like button, and if you want to see more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified when new content gets uploaded. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. Take care. Bye.